thank the member for Bowman. The question is the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Bass.
Thanks. Thank you very much, and it's very good to have the opportunity to speak on this most critical area of the free trade agreement between Australia and Japan. And, Deputy Speaker, I think there is no more important economic policy area than free trade. We talk a lot about removing red tape from the economy, removing impediments and so on. The reality is that the international system of trade barriers and protection represents probably the single most value-destructive act of global governments over the last century. Because what we're talking about in free trade liberalisation, Deputy Speaker, is effectively undoing the work that nations have done in previous eras. Of course, when you impose a tariff on a product, Deputy Speaker, you make it more expensive, you make it less attractive to buy, consequently less of it gets bought, and you also make it more difficult on the other side for people in your own nation to manufacture goods because it's harder to sell them overseas. So it is just an economic philosophy that is entirely flawed, entirely wrong. But interestingly, Deputy Speaker, it took this government to actually do something about it with our big trading partners. Korea, Japan, China, Deputy Speaker, all within the space of 12 months, the Minister for Trade has managed to secure these blockbuster agreements. And of course, Deputy Speaker, the Japanese agreement we're talking about today, it's our second largest trading partner, more than $70 billion in trade relations, and 97% of our exports will now be free of tariffs or treated preferentially as a result of this deal. Earlier, of course, we had the tremendous outcome on the Korean agreement as well, and of course, just last week, the China agreement, Deputy Speaker, which will see businesses like the owners of Lamb and Cumin, which is located in my electorate of Banks in Hurstville, Deputy Speaker. We don't have a lot of lambs in the electorate of Banks, Deputy Speaker, but we do have business people who export lamb product to China who will benefit immensely from the liberalisation under this agreement. But the question is, as the member for Bowman alluded to, why didn't this happen in the last 6 years? Why didn't it happen? Why did we have this sort of pause button on trade liberalisation during the entire period of the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government? And the reason, Deputy Speaker, is very clear, and that is that they didn't really believe in free trade. They didn't really believe that these agreements were politically attractive for them and for their union base, and as a consequence they didn't pursue them. And if you go back to 2008, Deputy Speaker, the member for Lilly showed great foresight when he said, in relation to China free trade agreement, "We're negotiating with the Chinese, but I don't anticipate any outcome of that process for some time," he said back in 2008, and he was absolutely right, Deputy Speaker, because it took 6 years and a change of government for there to be some outcome. And you do wonder why it took so long. It took a change of government. And again, Deputy Speaker, we see in 2011 that the member for Lilly, who was, I'll remind you, the treasurer of the whole country of Australia, Deputy Speaker, he was involved, according to the Financial Review, in arguments within Cabinet to the effect of that the politics of free trade weren't very good, and as a consequence the government shouldn't pursue it. And the AFR at the time, through Matthew Franklin, said at least 4 sources have agreed that Mr Swan, with the backing of several other ministers, challenged the political saleability of trade reform. So there it is, Deputy Speaker. Politics before substance, media release before the actual business of doing government. And what we know about our Minister for Trade, Deputy Speaker, is he's not focused on tomorrow's press release. He's focused on the hard execution, the hard work that actually leads to real results. And that's what we've seen over the last 12 months, Deputy Speaker. It's not about putting out some sort of fancy press release. It's about actually closing deals. And that is what he has done. And then, in a statement that you could sort of describe as making a virtue of necessity, the Trade Minister, Craig Emerson, who I believe had quite a lengthy title in his previous role, but trade was among it, and he actually said in 2012, free trade agreements, I think frankly, are overrated in terms of what they can achieve in terms of a relationship between Australia and China. Overrated, Deputy Speaker. Well, you know, come to Hurstville and tell the many small business people in my electorate who are trading every day with China in relation to tourism, professional services and many other areas. Tell them, come to Hurstville, Deputy Speaker, the former Minister Trade should do, and say to them that free trade with China is overrated. It's not overrated. It is actually a blockbuster breakthrough that has been delivered by the Minister for Trade. It's a fantastic thing for my electorate of banks. It's a fantastic thing for the entire nation. And so we see in the Japanese agreement, the Korean agreement, and of course now the Chinese agreement, what happens when you've got clear convictions, a clear philosophy, and the people, frankly, with the capacity and the horsepower to get hard work done. And that's what you see in this government. That's why we've been successful in free trade, and certainly the bill we discussed today is a great exemplification of that, and I commend it to the House.